Welcome to NHL Quick Hits. I'm David Crosby here with Steele Roden for a special episode to help you crush your fantasy hockey drafts for the 2021-22 NHL season. If you haven't seen them yet, go watch our last two episodes after this one for an in-depth look of our initial 14 rounds of player rankings for leagues with standard scoring. Today, we're going to take that to the next level here. Steele and I took what we learned, we reordered our rankings, and we're going to hit all of the crucial points of the draft here today. As a reminder, standard scoring usually includes goals, assists, points, plus minus, power play points, shots, and blocks for players, wins, goals against average, save percentage, and shutouts for goalies, which are the categories we considered for these rankings here today. You're going to hear us also discuss ADP a lot today, which is average draft position, or where other fantasy managers have been picking these players in their draft. So let's get started. Round one, Steele. We have ranked the consensus top four players a little bit differently, but they're all elite. Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Nathan MacKinnon, and Nikita Kucherov. You really can't go wrong with any of those four guys. Now, a couple episodes ago, you actually convinced me to bring Andrei Vasilevskiy back up to the 5 spot on my board. I also moved Cale Makar into the end of the first round, while you bumped him into the start of the second, but not too many big changes there. Let's talk about Chicago sniper Patrick Kane, though, for a minute, who we both ranked above his ADP and ahead of guys like Alexander Ovechkin, Cale Makar, and Mitch Marner. What has you so high on Patrick Kane?
I think it's just because he's such a power play specialist, and even just a specialist on the ice every time he is on the ice. You know, obviously when you bring in guys like Seth Jones, you get Jonathan Toews back into that first power play unit. I think it makes them way better than they were last year. Even last year, they were 11th overall in the NHL on the power play. I think it can be even better this year time around, especially since they brought in some key guys back into the lineup and then acquiring Seth Jones, like I said. I just think, like you said, there was a lot of value there. And looking at it now again, those top four guys, like you just said, Patrick Kane, Mitch Marner, and Alexander Ovechkin, when you have talented forwards like that, they bring a lot of the points, and they bring a lot more points than some of those top defensemen. And that's why the forwards usually go first. So you convinced me on bringing Patrick Kane up a little bit into the rankings here. I got him at 11th, and then Ovechkin and Mitch Marner right to follow him after. And that's why I kind of bumped Cale Makar down to 14 on the list.
Now, we talked a lot about Alex DeBrincat last episode, how you really like him, and he had a great season last year, of course, and maybe he's taken some of those goals away from Patrick Kane. But what I really like about Kane is last year he had only 15 goals in 56 games. Now, he still ended up with 66 points. That's an elite point total and point pace for a guy you want to pick in this range. But the season before that, he had 33 goals. Before that, 44. So I think Kane is definitely going to exceed that 15-goal total. And, of course, it's a longer season. We're back to that 82-game season. I think he could be right back in the 30s and maybe even pushing that 40-goal total again, which would rank him definitely inside the top 10 of fantasy scoring if he keeps those assist totals high. With a guy like DeBrincat on his wing, I don't think that's going to be too hard for him to do. Now, while I moved Cale Makar a few spots in my new rankings, I also moved Aleksander Barkov down a little bit, a guy that I had ranked really high compared to his ADP. But both of us have him right now at 18th, which is still 6 spots higher than his ADP of 24. What has you excited for Barkov's fantasy potential this year?
I think at this point in the draft, he's the best player available. And I'm really excited because he's shown us why he's one of the top centers in the entire league. And we've seen this over the last couple of years. The Florida Panthers have gotten a lot better. They've added a lot more to their depth forwards as well as on their defense. So I believe that they can get things going a lot better than they had last year. They were a really tough team to play against. And I think a lot of their struggles had to do with Sergei Bobrovsky not really finding his groove there. So it's not Sergei Bobrovsky right now. We're talking about Barkov. I like the potential I see here at this 18th position in the draft. And like I said, I think he's the best available player that you can draft in this position right here.
I love Barkov too, and I mean it's difficult to separate what a great player he is versus what a fantasy player he is, but thankfully those offensive totals kind of met up to that defensive standard that he set early in his career. And I think he maybe even will be pushing for a career high in points this year, because Florida, their top six especially, looks awesome this season. I think they're going to be really good. Now, the clear top four defensemen that we discussed last episode, Cale Makar, Victor Hedman, John Carlson, and Adam Fox, will likely all be scooped up before the second round is over. And then we've got the next tier of goalies behind Vasilevsky. Connor Hellebuck, Robin Lehner, and Darcy Kemper are all coming off the board between rounds 2 and 3, the way we have it mocked up here. That brings us to round 4. Kyle Connor has an ADP of 49, and you've got the Jets winger at 40. I slotted him in at 36. I think it would be a huge mistake for fantasy managers to let Connor slip anywhere past 40, and here's why. He's a fantastic goal scorer on an underrated Jets team with a really good and really underrated power play as well. He should almost certainly be better than last year in the assist category. And he still put up 50 points in 56 games. Now, last season, Connor had just 3 power play assists, but 10 goals, of course, with the man advantage. He had 8 power play assists each of the last 2 seasons. So I'm banking on him bringing that up to a point per game or better for the entire season. What caught your eye with Connor?
I think it's for all those reasons that you just listed, but it's also, again, he's on the top line, and he's playing with Blake Wheeler and Mark Scheifele, 2 of the top forwards in that division, as well as in the NHL. They're just so talented. I think those 2 guys, especially Blake Wheeler, kind of get overlooked a little bit. And so when you're playing on the top line, you're getting top power play minutes. And like you said, this guy's got a shot like no tomorrow, and a shot that is extremely underrated, in my opinion, and exactly like what you said there. So you bring all of this together, and the same kind of reason for Patrick Kane, why I moved him up to the first round of the draft, is because he does so well on the power play. He does so well with the guys that he plays with, and that's what I kind of see with Kyle Connor here. He's produced over the last 5 years at an explosion rate. He has 251 points in 305 games in his career. I just think that's outstanding, and I think moving him up compared to what his ADP was the right call here.
Well, you've also got Jets winger Nikolaj Ehlers 1 spot behind Connor at 41st. I left him at 49, closer to his ADP of 59. Why do you think he deserves to be nearly 20 spots higher than his current ADP?
Yeah, I believe he's a very consistent player, and he compares to a guy like Kyle Connor. I feel like they have the same kind of similar game style. Obviously, Kyle Connor's got a little bit more of a shot in his game than Nikolaj Ehlers, but they really seem like the same type of player to me. And I like the fact that when the time when Nikolaj Ehlers is a little struggling with his game, he gets a little fired up. He gets a little feisty, and I think that actually helps him with the way he wants to play the game, and it gets him back on track. Unlike some other guys that continue to struggle with not being able to find the back of the net and not being able to make the right plays. I think with Nikolaj Ehlers, it really gets the fire under his butt, and he gets going. And like I said, I compare him to a guy like Kyle Connor, and that's why I have him right behind him in the draft rankings.
Well, I'm not quite as high on him as you are. I think there are a lot of good signs with Ehlers. He notched his first point per game season of his young career on the strength of a bounce-back performance on the power play with 13 points in just 37 games. And that was after struggling with just 5 points with the man advantage in 71 games the previous season. Now, last year, he also averaged 3.15 shots per game. That's up from 2.86 the year before. So like you said, he's not only shooting well, he's shooting more. However, the one thing that gives me a little bit of pause, he had the best shooting percentage of his career. And while you said he is a good shooter, a more than 2% jump when compared to his career average prior to last season, I think it could be a small sample size, maybe a little bit. His goal total might take a small hit this year, but I'm still high in his potential. I think he deserves to be ranked and taken maybe a half round earlier than his current ADP. Speaking of potential, Steele, I have a distressed fantasy asset to sell you, and that seemingly nobody else wants, so you're going to get him at a huge discount. Pittsburgh Penguins defenseman Kris Letang has an ADP of 78, and you've got him right there at 76. Now, personally, I bumped him all the way up to number 50. And look, I don't think you need to take him that high in order to get him, but I think he should be going at least a round earlier than his ADP. And I don't think you'd be wrong taking him even 2 rounds earlier. He was tied for 3rd in points among defensemen last season. That's ahead of guys like John Carlson and Quinn Hughes, who are being drafted well ahead of where he is. Letang was 6th in points per game, 10th in power play points, 16th in plus minus, and he added 92 hits and 65 blocks if you have a league that also counts those statistics. And the thing about Letang is he does this every single year. He's 5th in points over the last 6 seasons combined. Over the last decade, he's 4th in points per game and 6th in power play points. So have I convinced you to nudge him up your board at all? And if not, what's holding you back?
Yeah, you make some valid points there, and I think I would move him up in the draft around 62 to 70, but that's as far as I'm going. And we've already kind of discussed this before. I just think there's a lot better defensemen out there that I can still choose from. Like you said, Quinn Hughes getting drafted a lot earlier than he is. I still like the play of drafting Aaron Ekblad. I think he's going to be phenomenal for the Florida Panthers this year, especially on the power play. It'll really help them on the blue line. And then guys like Roman Josi, Seth Jones, and Shea Theodore, who I have at 53, 54, and 55. So I think there's a couple of defensemen I would rather choose. That's just how I like to kind of form my team. It's all subjective. It's how you like to form your team. Kris Letang is still a great defenseman. I would still pick some defensemen before I get to Kris Letang.
All right, well, let's get off the blue line and let's give the people some more potential draft day steals. We both ranked William Nylander, Anze Kopitar, and Blake Wheeler about 30 spots higher than each of their ADPs. Why are those guys going so low, and how early do you think fantasy managers need to jump on them?
Yeah, it's kind of strange that they're getting ranked so low and getting picked so low in the rounds here. And I think I honestly believe it's because these guys are just getting forgotten because there's so much talent out there. Especially like we just talked about with Kyle Connor. You forget that he plays with a guy like Blake Wheeler, and he's a phenomenal player to have on your team, but you get lost with all of these guys who are young, upcoming, show really strong potential. And I think that's what we're seeing here with the older guys and Blake Wheeler and Anze Kopitar. And then, of course, with William Nylander, I think you're blinded by Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. He kind of gets forgotten by them when you're in the fast pace of the draft, waiting there, kind of trying to see who you're going to pick, and you're looking at the rankings, you're looking at the fantasy points. So those guys who are ranked lower, you don't really see them, and they're kind of forgotten. But you have to do your you have to do your research. You have to do the digging to find these type of players. And like you said, we moved them up substantially, and I think it would be a shame to see them go farther than the 8th round.
Yeah, it's crazy to think, I mean, if they all fall or if other managers wait for their ADP, if you could get these 3 guys in consecutive rounds in your draft, I mean, that is a huge haul in what is usually around the middle or early middle rounds of the draft. I can kind of understand it with Wheeler and Kopitar, and I think you nailed it there. They're both in their mid-30s. Sometimes older players get a little bit forgotten, but the thing is their productions remained high. Wheeler has averaged a point per game over the last 3 seasons with over 200 points. Guess what? There's 6 other players who have averaged between 1 and 1.02 points per game in that span. Alex Ovechkin, Mika Zibanejad, Patrice Bergeron, Braden Point, Mark Stone, and Sebastian Aho. Those guys are all top 40, if not top 30 picks in most fantasy drafts. So look where they're getting drafted, and then look at the potential and the consistency of a guy like Wheeler. And I think to me, it's a no-brainer when you get to this point in the draft. And Anze Kopitar, he's not far behind. He ranked 38th in points per game over that same span, and he also gets 0.83 power play points per game. Now, the third guy, like you said, William Nylander, a bit of a frustrating player, and I think his reputation might have taken a bit of a hit when he held out during the first couple months of that 2018-19 season. But in the last 2 years, he's in the top 50 for points per game. And after he exploded in the first round of the playoffs last year, one of the only Maple Leafs who weren't disappointing on the offensive end. I think Nylander's in line to get a lot more opportunities on the power play and potentially even on the top line in spurts. I think Sheldon Keefe did a little bit of mixing and matching throughout the season, but I could see Nylander joining Austin Matthews and maybe even up with Mitch Marner and get that trio together some nights if things just aren't clicking there in Toronto. Now, we picked all three of those gems out, Steele, so pat on the back to us if it works out for them this season. But here's one we don't agree on. Montreal Canadiens defenseman Jeff Petry has an ADP of 106. You've got him right there ranked at 107. Now, I know you're a Petry fan. It's not like I'm saying you don't know that Jeff Petry's a great defenseman. In fact, you mentioned him among the best defensemen last season. But when we're talking about fantasy, here's why I moved him up all the way to number 85 on my board and why I think he needs to be considered in that range. Last season, Petry was 8th in points per game among defensemen. He tied with Dougie Hamilton, who we both have ranked close to 40th. Hamilton, of course, signed in New Jersey this season, not exactly an offensive hotbed. Petry will return to Montreal as the unquestioned number one defenseman with Shea Weber out for the season. And I would bet Petry soaks up even more ice time, especially on that power play. And we discussed a couple episodes ago, Montreal made it to the Cup final on the back of some great defensive play and some stellar goaltending. But when I look at this team, Carey Price has not historically been that strong in the regular season, and they lost their number 2 center, Philip Deneau, their best defensive forward on their team, and that's not even mentioning Weber's defensive talent. So I think this team is going to need to score more than they did last season to stay in games, and I think Petry's going to be the main beneficiary of that, and he could maybe even flirt with top 5 in points by a defenseman this season. What do you think about that?
Yeah, again, you make some valid points there. I think this might be the one mistake I made looking back at the second draft that we just did. I think I definitely could have moved him up a lot more than where I have him right now. I'm not sure if I'm quite there at 85. There's a lot of pressure on him because of what's going on this season, filling the shoes that Shea Weber's kind of left him in that area, losing Philip Deneau, who helped them so much on the defensive side of things. So again, I love Jeff Petry. I think he's a talented defenseman. He brings a lot to the Montreal Canadiens that a lot of people don't notice. And I think you kind of nailed it on the head, like you said there. At 85, it's a valid pick. I think I would have him around 95 to 100.
I knew that was going to be an easy sell for you, Steele, because Petry's just so easy to like. This next one, though, it's going to be a tough sell for a lot of off-ice reasons. Evander Kane may have been cleared of the league's investigation into accusations of improper gambling, but now he's being investigated for breaking COVID protocols amid some other serious accusations related to alleged inappropriate behavior toward his estranged wife. Now, that's a lot to swallow, and I'm not risking a really high pick on Kane. I understand it's entirely for different reasons. I don't mean to group these players into the same category as of why they might miss the season. But to me, is he any less likely to play than Jack Eichel or Tuukka Rask this year? I mean, Kane led the Sharks in scoring last season with 49 points in 56 games. He's extremely productive in almost every single fantasy category in every season with the Sharks. And even if he gets moved, let's say the Sharks are just sick of whatever's going on with him and he either gets traded or he ends up on another team at some point this season. He performed well in Buffalo, where basically everybody struggles to do well, and he was good in Winnipeg before that. So are you willing to take a shot on him at some point in the draft, or are you just done until you see that he's going to be on the ice?
It would have to be a late round draft pick for me. Even then, I think I would still stay away from him. It's just too risky, in my opinion. There's too much things that can happen off the ice that could affect him playing in the games and really hurt my fantasy team here. So for me, it'd have to be one of the last picks for me in one of the last rounds. It's just too risky. Those off-ice situations and rumors that are going around that can bring him and make him stop playing the game. So for me, I'm staying away from a guy like Evander Kane.
Yeah, the one tough thing, too, is if he catches a suspension, it's not like you can put him on your IR spot either. So somebody like Jack Eichel or Tuukka Rask or Ben Bishop that you can maybe draft late and stash, Evander Kane's going to be taking up that bench spot for as long as he doesn't play. But as we get into the later rounds here, we both made some changes here, Steele, dropping off guys like Jakub Vrana after news broke that he would miss approximately 4 months with a shoulder injury, and you added a trio of forwards to your updated rankings. Philadelphia Flyers winger Joel Farabee, Montreal Canadiens winger Mike Hoffman, who is expected to miss the first 2 weeks of the season with a lower body injury, and Vancouver Canucks new winger Conor Garland, who I also had ranked in the 13th round. So what piqued your interest about these three forwards enough to move them into the 14th round on your board?
Yeah, I'll start with Conor Garland. I was actually kind of shocked I didn't have him in my original draft. But it's kind of what I'm going back to with Blake Wheeler. There's guys that you just kind of forget of because there's so much talent out there, and you're trying to pick guys that fit into the scheme of your team and the way things you want run for the entire year. For me, I think I just forgot. I did forget about a guy like Conor Garland, and I moved him up into the last round, and he might even be. He should probably be in one of in the second or third last rounds. He starting on this new team. He's going to bring a lot of talent. He's going to bring a lot of success up front. I wish he was playing on the top line with Brock Besser and Elias Pettersson. But for me, even on the second line, playing with JT Miller can still be very successful with that line. But for me, I would have rather seen him on the top line. That's why I have him in the last round. But I think a guy like Joel Farabee is a must pick, especially if you can get him in the last round. That would be, for me, one of the biggest steals in the entire draft. I think he just exploded last season and he really shown what he can do for the Philadelphia Flyers moving forward. So for me, Farabee is a must in the last round. And then for me as well, Mike Hoffman is kind of just a wild card pick. I think there could be some success if there's no one you can really pinpoint out of the entire group who to pick. I think if Mike Hoffman is still available, I think you have to take a shot on him. And even then, if he's not producing, you can go back and drop him later and pick someone else up later in the year. But for me, he's a wild card choice.
I like all three of these guys as late round flyers. And I added Ottawa Senators sophomore center Josh Norris into that last spot of the 14th round after removing Verona. But I noticed you did not rank a player I have way up in the 140 spot. Steele, why no love for Jonathan Toews?
Again, it's the exact same reason with Blake Wheeler and Conor Garland. It's just my mind is forgetting these players because I'm looking at the list and I'm seeing the ranking, I'm seeing the fantasy points that they can potentially get, and I'm not even looking farther down into the ranking. So for me, that's a misjudge, a mistake on my part. He should be in the draft, and I think he should even be up by the 11th or 12th round.
You know, it's hard with Toews because I think, especially banking on fantasy points and when you're looking at his projections, I think when these rankings were made, not a lot of people knew what to expect and knew whether he was going to start the season, how healthy he was going to be. But I read something interesting about Toews last night that kind of made me bump him even a little higher up my board. Per Mark Lazarus of The Athletic, 400 days since Toews last played an NHL game. He played nearly 23 minutes in a preseason hockey game, and he looked great doing it. He picked up an assist, he scored in the shootout, and he showed some flashes of that player that we haven't seen in a long time. And I know it's been a while, but the last time we did see Toews, he had 9 points in 9 playoff games following a 70-game season in which he had 60 points, which, of course, is pretty good fantasy numbers. And let's not forget that in 2018-19, Toews put up a career high with 35 goals and 81 points. The now 33-year-old captain battled a previously unknown health condition that turned out to be chronic immune response syndrome. And for the first time in a long time, he's feeling healthy. And listening to the stories of, you know, how he was feeling in some of those games and how he was struggling to even move and his vision and just all these different complications that he had without knowing what was going on, I think Toews could flirt with 60 points if he manages to play the full season and stay healthy on a much improved Blackhawks team. So let's move a little bit further here into our last segment. Let's wrap on this, Steele. Here are some of the highest ranked players by Yahoo that do not appear on either of our draft boards. Who are you watching closest if they go undrafted? And if you don't like any of these guys, pick one you do like that's not on your board right now. So Rangers winger Chris Kreider, he's ranked 126th after scoring 30 points in 50 games last year. Tenacious Canadiens winger Brendan Gallagher is at 127. He had just 23 points in an injury-shortened 35-game season. And then, of course, he struggled with just 6 points in 22 playoff games. The Rangers' number one pick in 2020, Alexis Lafreniere, he slotted in at 135, and he's looking to improve on a 21-point rookie season. And when the Flyers surprisingly traded Jakub Voracek to Columbus this offseason, they got back winger Cam Atkinson, a guy you don't really hear that much about, probably because he was on the Blue Jackets. Yahoo has him ranked at 154th. He had 34 points last season on a really bad Blue Jackets team, but he's only 3 years removed from a 69-point campaign, and considering what the Flyers gave up for him, he's probably going to be in line for a top 6 role there. Anaheim prospect Trevor Zegras landed at 175. He had 13 points in 24 games. He looks poised for a potential breakout. And finally, the first overall pick by the New Jersey Devils way back in 2017, Nico Hischier was ranked all the way down at 189th after scoring 11 points in just 21 games last year. So of those players, or maybe someone I didn't mention, who are you adding to your watch list if they go undrafted?
Yeah, out of those names you just listed on my watch list would have to be Alexis Lafreniere. And I think after watching the disappointing rookie season he had last year, I expect big things from him this year, as well as the New York Rangers overall. I had such high expectations for that team to make the playoffs and be one of the top teams. And it was a huge letdown when there just wasn't any success whatsoever. And a lot of internal problems were happening with the Rangers as well that really affected them throughout the season. So for me, I'm looking at a guy like Alexis Lafreniere who should really have a bounce back season and get back into that top prospect kind of shape that we saw him before he was drafted. Guys that I were looking at off the board, I was looking at a guy like Phillip Danault, who is projected to have over 55 points and having that new role with the LA Kings. So if he's still available, he's a guy to look to right now. He's projected to have 14 goals and 41 assists. So having projections over 55 points on the season can be really helpful for your team, as well as a guy like Jonathan Drouin. So he's back in the lineup for the Montreal Canadiens. That second line with Christian Dvorak and Josh Anderson looked really, really good in that preseason game. And a guy like Jonathan Drouin, he's not the type that's going to shoot the puck, but he's a playmaker. He's going to get a lot of first and second assists for you. And being on that second power play unit as well can really be beneficial for your team. So those are the guys I looked off the board, and Alexis Lafreniere was the one guy that you listed who I have my eyes on.
I love all those players. I think they definitely deserve to be on your radar. The one guy you didn't mention there, Trevor Zegras, I think he's a guy I'm going to be watching really closely. The talent is super obvious with him. It's just a matter of whether he can get that production in his first full year, which is a tough thing to do, but I think he's got the talent to do it. That's all for today's episode. Please like and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Follow us on social media. And most importantly, let us know what you think of our rankings and give us your own personal rankings, maybe some decisions you ran into or you're considering ahead of your drafts. On behalf of Steele Roden, I'm David Crosby, and thanks for tuning in to NHL Quick Hits.